Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Deep Dive, where we dive in deep on everything Helldivers 2. So today, we're going to be talking about the Eagle Strafing run. Alright, so the Eagle Strafing run is another one of those stratagems in Helldivers 2 that was not widely used by the community. I mean, hell, I didn't want to use it personally, but the only times I felt the need to use it was begrudgingly when they gave us that daily order that made us use this thing. And even then, I really just kind of wanted to skip it, but I always kind of forced myself to do it. And the primary reason for that is because it just wasn't strong against anything above light armored units. I mean, it wouldn't even kill those half the time, so why would I use this thing if I had plenty of other ways to dispatch of medium armored units, elite units, and even the light armored units? It doesn't make sense, right? So Arrowhead did notice the lack of use of this stratagem and many other stratagems in the game, and they gave it a much needed buff. But is this buff any good? Is this a stratagem now worth your time? Let's go over this and go deep in on the Eagle Strafing run, so that way you can figure out exactly how this thing works, if it's actually good now, and overall, more importantly, give it an overall ranking, so that way you can know my personal opinion on if this thing is worth your time. Anyways, let's get into it. So the tooltip for the Eagle Strafing run reads, a strafing run of the battlefield to clear small targets, delivered almost instantly. So for the patch notes that they released for the Eagle Strafing run, they increased the base uses from 3 to 4, and they also increased the armor penetration, so now it can actually deal damage to heavily armored units. The stat breakdown for the Eagle Strafing run is the call-on timer is 3 seconds, the uses are 4 charges before rearm, or 5 with the ship upgrade. The cooldown to the next available strike is 15 seconds, or 8 seconds with the ship upgrade. The rearm time is 138 seconds or 115 seconds with the ship upgrade. The maximum number active at once can be unlimited, so this means that your entire party can throw in 4 of these at any time, or just any number of these at any time. And the movement direction for this Eagle Strafing run is a straight line in front of the player. So the ship upgrades that affect this Eagle Strafing run specifically are liquid ventilated cockpit. Effective cooldown time for Eagle stratagems is reduced by 50%. So when you call this Eagle Strike in, it's typically the base cooldown is 15 seconds before you can call in the next charge. But with this upgrade, it actually cuts that in half to 7.5 seconds, but the game rounds it up to 8 seconds. The next one is pit crew hazard pay, and that makes Eagle rearm time reduced by 20%. So to clarify, the rearm time happens when you've run out of charges. It basically is the overall cooldown mechanic for Eagle airstrikes. Now for this strike specifically, it drops the cooldown from 2 minutes and 30 seconds for rearm to 1 minute and 55 seconds. And the last one is expanded weapon bay, which all Eagle stratagems have 1 additional use. So for the Eagle Strafing run more specifically, this takes it from 4 base uses to 5 base uses. So let's jump into the general overview for the Eagle Strafing run. So as an early disclaimer, all Eagle airstrikes have different behaviors when they're called in. So for the Eagle Strafing run more specifically, basically what's going to happen is you throw it in, and depending on the direction you are facing when you threw it in, it's going to go in a straight line from that direction you threw it in where the beacon is placed. So the key thing is you need to be facing the direction you want this thing to go, because again, it's going to go in a complete straight line. So how does the Eagle Strafing run overall work? This is probably one of the easiest stratagems to use in the game, because it's literally a throw in and it goes in the direction you want it to go. But this also can have the counter effect of being one of the most difficult stratagems to use in the game, because it can be quite punishing if you miss your mark or if you mistime this thing. So how it works is you throw it in, and it's going to take about 3 seconds for it to strike the area in which you want it to strike, and this shoots at a really high speed of bullets in a straight line. So once you use one of your charges of the strafing run, it's going to take about 15 seconds or 8 seconds with the ship upgrade to be able to use your next charge. Now this cooldown actually starts right when you see impact. And so the 3 seconds that the barrage is actually happening actually counts toward that. So a lot of times you'll see 5 seconds on the countdown timer instead of 8. One quick note to just re-clarify, rearm happens once you've expended all 4 to 5 charges, depending on your upgrade again, for you to be able to call in your next set of strikes. Something else to keep in mind is that this bullet barrage is actually very narrow. So you got to be mindful that, like, okay, it's got to be in a straight line, and if you're slightly off, it's going to completely miss the enemies or do very little damage, because they're only going to get the side of the barrage or something along those lines. So you got to be very calculated with where you place this thing. Now, another key thing about this strike, and really the only big challenging thing with it, is gauging the distance between the beacon and your targets. So again, this is a very quick strike, and from my testing, you want the enemies to be about 2 to 3 meters away from the beacon. I understand this is kind of hard to gauge in the heat of combat, but at the same time, that's kind of the sweet spot for enemies to be able to take the most maximum amount of damage from this thing. If you throw it too close, the enemies will pass past the beacon and they won't really get hit by the barrage, or it will do very little damage to them. The same thing as if it's too short. If they're about 8 to 10 meters away, they're probably not going to take very much damage from it as well. It's just going to fly in front of them and then just barely miss them on the back end. So the key thing here is that timing is absolutely key for this strike. Depending on where the target is, you want to actually try to take that into consideration when you're throwing it in. So if it's coming straight at you, you want to give it a little bit of distance, so that way when it's starting to make impact, they're actually within that 2 to 3 meter range, so where they get the brunt of the impact. But again, I understand it's kind of difficult to do in the heat of combat, but with some practice, you can actually get good at this. So what is the overall utility for the Eagle Strafing run? And just to prep you ahead of time before I get into this section, I'm going to be saying things like if it's used correctly, or it can do X, or something along those lines. And that's a very important thing to understand for the later part of the video. So just to take a step back and kind of jump into the patch notes a little bit here. This thing went from having some minor utility to actually having pretty major utility in the game because of one simple change to its armor penetration. Damage to heavily armored units is a really big thing to add to this strike, because it was able to do some things like, okay, it could destroy objectives, but it wasn't as consistent, and it could not do any damage to the elite enemies in the game, but now it actually can damage those things pretty consistently. Okay, so the big idea before we start breaking down what exactly this thing can do is that it can do these things. It can kill elites, it can destroy objectives. So that's a big distinction you need to keep in mind, because this strike was designed to do one thing, and it can do other things. Okay, so first, this strike is one of the best things in the game now with dealing with the majority of objectives in the game, such as the illegal broadcast, shrieker nests, spore towers, mortar encampments, and many other things in the game. So for shrieker towers and spore towers more specifically, you really want to have the beacon around that 3 meter range or so that way the strike is actually climbing up the stem and actually hitting the spore tower and the shrieker towers with its full force. If you throw the beacon right on these things, it will likely fly over and not fully kill them. Or if you throw it too short, again, it won't do anything except for some back end damage. So the big thing to keep in mind is that you want to get it in that 3 meter range to be able to do some serious damage and actually destroy these things. So the strike can also destroy bug holes and fabricators with decent consistency. Bug holes a little less so, because I had a hard time really getting it to consistently destroy bug holes without just getting that angle exactly perfectly. With fabricators, it was a little bit of a different story. I felt like these could be destroyed quite easily. Now against enemies, again, the strafing run can be very, very devastating if used correctly. So focusing on the Terminid side for a bit, this strike can pretty much kill anything up to charger level. So for chargers, you will likely not kill these things with one strike. It will usually take around 2 to 3 to kill it. So there are occasions where you can kill a charger with one barrage, like if you hit it on the backside or something, but it's really inconsistent in my opinion, and the more likely thing to happen is that it's going to open up a weak spot for you to be able to hit the charger and finish it off. So one key tip is that you can use stun grenades to keep the chargers in place, because they do have erratic movement, especially if you're trying to personally dodge them while you're trying to line up the strike. And honestly, it's a little bit harder in the heat of combat, especially when you're getting swarmed by other enemies. So you're just gonna have to do the best you can to just try and get it as close as possible to the chargers while they're not moving, for example. So for Battle Titans, it's gonna be a similar story. It's gonna take about 3 to 4 strikes to kill these things. But again, just like a charger, if you angle them right, you can actually take off some of the back plating of a Battle Titan and be able to finish it off with something else. Now, there are rare occasions where the strike can hit perfectly on its head and go up its back and over it from the front, and it will die. But again, it's not always consistent. Now, a riskier strategy is you can sit there and wait for it to spit on you. You can time it well and try to use this thing, and it will sometimes, and again, sometimes it can, with its mouth open, kill this thing in one shot, but again, it's not a consistent thing. On the automaton front, it's a similar story. Light to medium armored units will typically die in one barrage. Tanks and turret towers will typically die in one strafing run, especially if you hit the vents on the back side. However, I would just wager that at least for tanks more specifically, it's going to take more than one. And if a turret tower is facing you, it may take more than one. Just take that into consideration. So for Hulks, it's a similar story to Chargers, but the one caveat is that Hulks have that big weak spot on the vent side on their back. So that's the sweet spot. So if you can stun up a Hulk, turn around and throw a strafing run up its back, then you can kill it with the strafing run pretty consistently. However, again, I would assume it's going to take more than one to kill a Hulk, so you're probably going to have to do a strafing run and then something else. So against factory striders, it's pretty good. It's not great. It will do a fair amount of damage, especially if you hit the factory strider straight on. Paired with other stratagems, this is going to be pretty effective, but in general, it's only okay against the factory striders. And one final thing is that it can take out bot ships. So nice. So what is the overall strategy for the Eagle Strafing run? Honestly, you want to use this thing as many times as possible because the fact that you get 4 to 5 uses and the fact that it is so great at objective killing the majority of enemies in the game, and actually can do some solid damage to elites. This is actually something you want to be using on cooldown as quickly as possible. So I would say that the Eagle Strafing run pretty much pairs well with any other offensive stratagem in the game. My favorite combinations for both sides, the automatons and the terminists combined, are I do like to pair this with the Gatling barrage. I think that that's actually a really good stratagem to pair with the Eagle Strafing run. And oddly enough, the walking barrage is another one that I really like, because the walking barrage is going in a straight line trajectory, very similar to the Eagle Strafing run, and it is a little bit slower. You can actually have strafing runs going the same direction, walking barrages going the same direction, and create a lot of chaos on the battlefield for any of the enemies in that direction. So it's actually very good for that. All right, so now for everybody's favorite part of the video, where I give my final overall conclusions and thoughts for the Eagle Strafing run and give it my final grades. So the overall effectiveness, I'm gonna give this a solid B. The biggest thing about this strike that I do not like is the amount of ifs and cans related to it. Now again, I'm trying so hard not to hold some things against it, but again, when you have to think so much about using something, it kind of just gets annoying in my opinion, right? I just wanted to do something or do what I wanted to do. From all the testing I've done, the two things that this thing needs to reach its full potential are, it needs a much larger radius of effect when it's coming in, so that way it can actually cover more ground and not be so punishing on the fact that you may misalign it. And the other thing it needs is it does need a shorter cooldown on the rearm. I was thinking closer to 75 seconds. Now that seems like an extreme difference from the other Eagle stratagems, but again, this thing is not as strong as those in my opinion. But overall, to put a bow on it, this thing can be extremely effective with the right hands, with enough practice, but a lot of people in the game don't want to think that much. They just want the thing to work or do what they want it to do. They don't want to have to worry about doing some geometry when they're throwing something in. But again, it can be incredibly effective if used properly. So for its overall usefulness, it is a solid A for me because it is very useful, primarily because of the high amount of uses or charges that you get with it. So again, the best use cases are for fighting objectives and also for ad clearing. So that's what this thing really excels at, and it's actually very good at it. But it can hurt everything in the game, which is one of the better things about it. And it's a great assistant and has the high amount of uses. So what more can you ask for? It's a pretty solid stratagem for its overall usefulness. So for the fun factor, I'm gonna have to give it a B because it's fun for the most part, I guess. It's not, oh my gosh, it's crazy good type fun, but it gets the job done, so it does good at what it does. Again, the straight line thing works really well for the most part, but then if something slightly moves to the left, or if you have to deviate for some reason, you're screwed, which makes it not fun to use in that situation. And this is by far the most subjective thing about the fun part, but I agree with the comments. I feel like that this thing should have a more dramatic sound effect when it comes in, like that burr sound you hear from any other strafing type thing that you've heard in other video games in the past. That would give it that cool factor in my opinion. So overall, I would have to give the Eagle Strafing run a solid B. I want to love this strike, I really do, but I just like it. The radius needs to be a lot wider to make this thing way more effective, and I really do feel like the rearm needs to be lowered so that way you can use it even more often. And overall, I just feel like it needs that cool factor and that fun factor to make it just a little bit more cool and just feel powerful to use. I think that would go a long way to helping it out. But yeah, it's just good at what it does, but it doesn't mean it's great at what it does. All right, that's all my thoughts on the Eagle Strafing run. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you're somebody that's a really big enjoyer of this thing, let me know down in the comments below if I missed something, and I want to know what you think. But anyways, guys, I'll see you in the next video.